Root crops have a place in every vegetable garden, and they are among the first and the last vegetables to be harvested. And with proper home storage, you'll have fresh supply into winter. These crops are also ideal because they take up less space in your garden and can be harvested over a long period of time. They thrive in gardens, whether in the ground, raised beds, or even containers. The cool, wet climate in the spring and fall here is very favorable. Traditionally, roots were always sown directly into the ground, but some varieties benefit starting them in trays with your seeds and then transplanting. Many root crops also are beneficial crop to your garden soil itself. The root grows, and as you harvest and pull out your root crops, you are loosening the soil and it can improve the tilth. By growing your own root crops, you can explore new and exciting varieties not available in the markets. And experiencing the joy of pulling red carrots, golden beets, and purple potatoes from the ground feels like finding buried treasure in your garden. Gardening history mentions root crops being grown by the early civilizations. Africa, Europe, Asia, Oceania, and the Americas have all had a hand in the movement of root crops around the globe. Just knowing that beets, carrots, turnips, potatoes, sweet potatoes, onions, and parsnips have been popular for more than 5,000 years tells us something about them. Root crops have survived because they're easy to grow, nutritious, and delicious to eat. Here are the learning objectives for today. Let's learn about the different types of root crops and their history. Investigate the growing conditions and cultural practices to optimize root crop success. Learn about crop rotation and companion planting, essential for plant health and production. Understand which plant families and the various root crops and where they belong. And learn about growing root crop specifics and what are the most successful varieties. Root vegetable is a kitchen category and not a botanical one. Botany distinguishes true roots such as taproots and tuberous roots from non-roots, geophytes, such as bulbs, corms, rhizomes, and tubers. All 5 are considered root crops. Most bulbs belong to the allium family. Bulbs store energy for the plant in fleshy layers above and below the surface. You can start harvesting bulbs as soon as they are big enough to be worth using. This is what I do when thinning my onion and leek crops. The young plants make for tasty eating, and it allows the remaining ones to grow larger. However, if you do want to store your bulb crops for any length of time, they must be fully mature. Corms are starchy underground plant stems that preserves the water, energy, and nutrients to enable the plant to reproduce and survive. Water chestnut is native to Europe and Asia and was first observed in the United States in the mid-1800s. It can be grown outdoors in USDA hardiness zones 6A through 12B. What I found interesting is that the water chestnut plant has become invasive in many regions of the US, especially New England, thus not advised or must be planted with care. Their floating mats restrict light availability, reduce the oxygen content, and heat the water of lakes and ponds, causing habitat problems and environmental consequences. Taro, a staple food of the Pacific, is a plant grown for its large corms, which are extremely nutritious. Its most common use is in the form of poi, which is made by boiling or steaming the taro root and pounding it into a paste. It thrives in tropical and moist environments. Elephant ear taro can be grown as an ornamental, which grows over 6 feet tall, but the plant is tender and won't tolerate the winters in Oregon. I have master gardener friends who grow banana trees, another tropical plant, as ornamentals. So the taro would be treated with similar cultural practices and would be beautiful interplanted near a home garden pond. If you grow taro, be aware that the raw leaves or corms are poisonous. So be careful for pets and children. And anything that you grow and is harvested must be cooked before consuming. Rhizomes are a main plant stem that grows horizontally underground or across the surface of the soil. They have nodes that produce shoots. Ginger is the actual rhizome that is consumed, whereas asparagus rhizomes, it is the shoots or spears that emerge topside that are eaten in spring. Tap roots grow vertically downward. It stores energy for the plant and is in the sturdy orbs or cylindrical roots. They have that characteristic rat-like tail at the end of each of the orbs. This guides the root deep into the loose soil. These crops do well in our area, especially in the spring and fall. Many of the taproot crops can be grown year-round with the proper timing and season extenders. These roots need to be fed moderately with a balanced fertilizer during the growing season to ensure good root development. The biggest cause for failure of taproot crops is the germination, and the reason is usually inadequate moisture. You can add a floating row cover and also do a lot of monitoring of moisture for that first 5 to 14 days when you're looking for germination. Tuberous roots are modified enlarged roots that store food for plants, and they are typically clustered together at the bottom of a stem with one growing point on the proximal end. Both the cassava and sweet potato are tender plants that want warm weather. Season extenders can help with this process for the sweet potato. While researching, I learned that the spelling of sweet potato is transitioning into a compound word in the agriculture industry and academia. Therefore, I am using that new spelling here today. Cassava requires USD hardiness zone 10 to 11, making it not suitable for the Willamette Valley. Cassava is a staple for many countries. Nearly 70% of the world cassava production is concentrated in 5 countries: Nigeria, Brazil, Thailand, Indonesia, and the Congo Democratic Republic. Tubers are thick underground stems without a tunic or basal plate. They contain many nodes or eyes that sprout buds on the tuber's surface for reproduction. Root crops grow best in an open, sunny location with sandy loam and peat soils. The addition of organic matter can improve heavy clay soils. A light and loose soil that will retain moisture is ideal for growing root crops. Raised beds or containers, such as grow bags, are excellent options for root crops, when the soil does not provide the necessary depth or the necessary circulation of the water through percolation of the water through the soil. In early spring, when soil is workable, loosen at least 7 to 8 inches of the soil and incorporate compost, coconut coir, sand, or commercial raised bed soil. The ideal pH is from 6 to 7, but root crops can do well in a pH range of 7 to 8 as well. Before planting, broadcast 1 pound of balanced fertilizers such as 20-20-20 for each 100 square feet, or add aged animal manures and compost for good growth of these crops. Root crop pests may cause damage to the leaves and or roots. Regular monitoring is the best way to stay ahead of the pests. Shown here are aphid larvae. Root crops' vegetative leaves are vulnerable to pests like leaf miners, flea beetles, whiteflies, and aphids. Make observations, take actions, and then keep a consistent monitoring and abatement tactic to help save your crop. What is more challenging is the damage going on underground. So here's a strategy. When thinning your crops or cultivating, get down on your hands and knees and take close notice for any signs such as slug trails or frack, bug poop, on the plants. If you suspect underground pests, close monitoring is suggested. Rabbits, rodents, deer, raccoons, or squirrels sneak into the gardens as we sleep to gobble the greens and the roots below the surface. It's sort of a love-hate relationship. We call them pests, but they're really wild creatures that roam their world, which we share, and they're searching for food, water, mates, and a place to raise their young. We need to recognize that as human habitat expands, the wildlife will wander into our yards and gardens. Barriers, fencing, and netting are options to discourage the vertebrate wildlife. Birds are not as insistent with root crops as they are with fruits and berries, so that's not really a big worry. But when our wildlife friends have crossed the line to foe, it's time to discourage them or limit their access to our hard-earned crops. Cultural practices and preventive measures are our best defense against root crop pests. Picture 1 on the top left above is purple tulle. Tulle fabric or even row cover can be clipped to hoops, stretched over the garden bed, and secured tight at ground level. When you batten down a row of veggies, it helps to deter those squirrels or rabbits from scampering in. It can also provide a barrier for crawling or flying insects. Picture 2 shows a yellow, sticky bug trap. When placed in your garden, it traps bugs, but better yet, it informs us which bugs are flying around and which are the pests. Continuing clockwise, this is a gopher trap. At Grow an Extra Row, we work hard to produce root crops to feed families with food insecurities. So we had a persistent and hungry family of gophers that needed to be stopped. The trap was the final solution. Picture 4 is some very fine fencing mesh that can be installed under the garden bed. It needs to go down as deep as you can possibly get it and come all the way up to the surface. The fine wire grid helps to stop gophers, moles, or rodents that are burrowing towards the crops. And why stop the moles? Well, they do damage some root crops as they search out for worms and insects. Understanding the plant families and crop rotation are essential for plant health and production. The annual practice of planting vegetables successively in different garden locations will avoid the buildup of soil-borne pests, diseases, and make for a better use of your soil nutrients. The yearly movement of crops and rotation on that 4-year cycle will help prevent problems, fortify soil, and promote good root crop production. The practice of crop rotation and companion planting increases the natural diversity in the garden. Companion planting is a great way to use space efficiently. Plants can grow mutually in mutually beneficial arrangements. Featured here are 6 plant families and the root crops in those families. Look at that top gray box. The family name is brassicas, and then the root crop in that family are radish, turnip, and rutabaga. In the italics are additional common vegetable crops that you may be growing that are from this same family. That they are broccoli, cabbage, and so on. Bolded are some suggested companion planting. Green onions help to deter moles and voles. The link listed on the bottom from the University of Minnesota gives lots of ideas and rationale for science-based proven companion plants. Many home vegetable gardeners have limited garden space, resulting in the same plants being grown in that same place year after year. Hey, my tomatoes did great there last year. I'm going to plant them there again. Well, this common practice leads to the buildup of soil-borne pathogens. Crop rotation is a simple cultural practice that can help divert problems. The principle of crop rotation is to plant a crop in a different location each year. Rotating crops disrupts pathogens, insects, and nematodes by removing the host required to complete their life cycle. Pests may remain in the soil for quite some time, waiting for their required host to be planted. Therefore, a crop should be grown only at that same spot for a maximum of once every 3 years. While a 3-year rotation is the minimum recommended, a 4 or 5-year rotation will be even better at reducing the buildup of soil-borne pests. In the photo, the multiple raised beds can make the process of rotation very straightforward. By dividing your vegetable garden into smaller plots, you can create a physical barrier between each garden, even when each bed is located close to one another. So now let's look at the specifics for crop growing. Growing bulbs. So garlic originated near the Southeast Europe and Western Asia, and it is thought to be one of the first cultivated plants, and it's prized as a culinary flavoring for over 7,000 years. Garlic is a bulb-forming perennial that is usually grown as an annual. It is easy to save a few of your best garlic bulbs each year and then plant those cloves for an annual crop. Garlic is a cool season crop. You plant hard-neck garlic bulbs in September or October, and about the same time you would plant your tulip bulbs. Soft neck garlic is planted in the spring. If you happen to forget and you're planting hard-neck garlic in the spring, it'll still grow, but anticipate smaller bulbs and cloves. Hardneck garlic gets its name from the woody flower stalk, which grows through the center of the bulb. Hardnecks are better suited for our cooler climate and does quite well in Western Oregon. Amazingly, garlic tolerates a very wide range of pH from 4.5 up to 8.3. Garlic is pretty easy to grow. The most persistent problem that has plagued garlic in our area is rust. It's a fungal disease. This causes the leaves to lose chlorophyll and the plant becomes less vigorous in their growth as the rust progresses. Here, crop rotation is one way to help prevent rust from reoccurring in your garlic crops. Above are some more detailed planting and harvesting instructions. The onion most likely originated in Central Asia and has been cultivated by every major civilization from Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans onward. Apparently, the word onion comes from the Latin word unio, meaning one, because it produces one bulb versus a garlic or a shallot, which produces many bulbs. The onion are bulb-forming biennials, usually grown as annuals. They are cool crops and are planted in the very early spring, and they prefer a pH soil of about 6 to 7.2. The length of daylight hours will ultimately determine how large an onion bulb will grow and also its spacing. Full sun is optimum. If growing your onions in less sun or dappled sun, you can still grow onions, but you may have to settle for smaller bulbs or a more of a green onion type of crop. An interesting consideration, you might try interplanting some onion sets in an ornamental garden. The tall vertical leaf growth of an onion can add height for a design element. Walla Walla, here are some varieties that are successful. Walla Walla grow large and are mild and sweet, but they don't store very well. Copra, Patterson, seed onions, Yellow Rock, White Ebenezer, Red Ringmaster are also very popular varieties. Cipollini type is a small, flat, and flavorful onion. This is a pretty pricey onion at the farmer's market, so it might be one that is worth growing in your garden. Leeks, the non-budding bulbing relative of the onion, is native to Eurasia and was first cultivated somewhere in Eastern Mediterranean. It has been a food of the common people since the ancient Egyptian and still is in many parts of Europe. In the US, however, leeks are considered a luxury food with prices to match the elevated status. Leeks are biennials grown as annuals in the garden. They are cool crops best planted in early spring. Starts are grown from seeds, best started indoors in shallow trays of seedling mix sometime in February or early March. You need to estimate about 8 to 10 weeks before your anticipated last frost of spring. You can also plant leeks in the fall before the first frost. Let them get a little bit established. After germination, seedlings can be moved to a cold frame to develop after the threat of frost. Leek seedlings can be planted using the directions outlined here. The edible part is called the shank, and it's layers of fleshy stems. This structure and growing pattern is what makes it a bulb. The shank is intertwined with soil, so be sure to chop and rinse your leeks well before you cook them. The leek varieties that I have tremendous success with are King Richard and Tadorna. Ginger first appeared in the southern parts of ancient China. From there, it spread to India, the Spice Islands, and the rest of Asia and West Africa. Europe saw ginger for the first time in the 1st century when the ancient Romans traded with India. When Rome fell, Europe forgot about ginger until Marco Polo brought it back again from his travels in the East. It was popular in the Middle Ages for medicinal remedies and is still used by many people for medicinal purposes. In the 15th century, it was traded throughout the world, making its way to the Caribbean, where it started to grow with ease. Today, India is the greatest producer of ginger in the world. It prefers a tropical climate, but it does have a place in the Willamette Valley if carefully cared for. Ginger can be propagated from a single piece of healthy plump ginger from the market. Use the directions above to get your rhizomes ready for planting. Once established, the plant can go outside in a wide pot or container or transplanted into a garden in June. The rhizomes will grow horizontally during the summer. As you need French ginger, just tug gently up on one of the stalks to reveal a rhizome and slice off that portion. Bury any of the remaining rhizome back in there and let it continue to grow. The ginger plant should be harvested or moved indoors or into a greenhouse before the first frost. This is another plant that could add a variety in an ornamental garden bed with its tall grass-like foliage. And if you really have a green thumb, you might even get some flowers. Growing tap roots like carrots, radishes, beets, parsnips, and horseradish is fun. Root crops are terrific and are mostly grown from seeds, but it's interesting that horseradish is one of the few taproot crops that is not grown from seeds. We'll get into that more later. These cool crops can be planted early when the soil is about 40 degrees in the early spring and late summer for a fall crop. Thinning young seedlings is essential for the root development, and you might want to look at the seed packet for recommendations. Harvesting and eating some of the baby root crops as you thin achieves this goal. Be aware that parsnips need nitrogen-rich fertilizer mid-season. Other crops feed moderately with an emphasis on the phosphorus and potassium. Harvest time depends on the plant variety, with radishes ready as early as 21 to 35 days, beets 50 to 65 days, carrots 65 to 90 days, or even 220 days if you're overwintering them. Parsnips is a 100 and plus days, and you really want to get these in early because you want to harvest them before the summer heat sets in. Each of these seeds is pretty small, so you can save time and money by making your own seed tape. And here's a link to find out how to make seed tape. And I've got a little tip for you. When I make my seed tape, I make a beet and radish combo seed tape. The beet seeds are spaced 5 inches apart, and then I place a single radish seed in between them. The radishes quickly develop and mature, and I pull them out and harvest them. But the beets continue to grow, and that extra space allows them to develop. Beets are one of my family's favorites, and varieties for the red beets include Detroit, Red Ace, and Early Wonder. We also like Bull's Blood and Lutz, which produces amazing greens, and Touchstone is a beautiful golden beet. Carrots are a cool season biennial and was probably first domesticated somewhere in the region of Afghanistan. It didn't get its familiar color, orange color, until it arrived in Holland. Sorry, I'm fighting a cold that my grandchildren gave me. The right spacing for growing carrots depends on the fertility of the soil and the type and the size of the root you want. If you have poor soil, you want to space them 5 inches apart. If you have good soil, 3 inches. Excellent soil, you can go with 1.5 and then do a lot of thinning. Carrots come in many shapes, sizes, and colors. My suggestion is to browse the catalog for the flavor profile that suits you. Carrot varieties have lots of possibilities. If you need a compact carrot for growing in containers, try Orbit, Little Finger, and Danvers half long. Yayas are big and meaty, and they're good for juicing. Meridia and Autumn King are overwintering option varieties. The parsnip is a cool season biennial. It has been an important crop since the time of Romans, and it was actually a staple root vegetable in Europe for centuries until it was eventually displaced by the potato. It is still more popular in Europe than the US, but for my family, it is a must in stews and is always added when I'm roasting vegetables. The most modern varieties are resistant to parsnip canker or root rot. Try the All-American, Cobham Improved, and the Harris model. Radishes are cool crops, meaning that they can be planted when the soil is about 40 degrees in the spring and late summer for fall crops. 60 degrees is the optimum growing weather. Heat in the summer will cause it to become very pungent in flavor and give it a woody texture. Because they are quick to develop, succession planting is advised. Plant a small amount about every 2 weeks, and then thinning the young seedlings is essential for root development. Harvesting the baby root vegetables achieves this goal. When I have a bumper crop of radishes, my family enjoys them roasted. The cooking brings a sweet flavor to this spicy orb. There are different shapes and colors that are lovely. Round ones include bright red. They are ready in about 25 days. Crimson Giant, 30 days, or Cherry Belle, which resists turning pithy. French Breakfast is more tolerant of the heat. And I grow the watermelon radish, which has a green and white exterior and pink flesh. It's really pretty in salads. The daikon radishes, an Asian variety, can grow 12 to 18 inches long. Or humongous, like the one in this picture. The young ones are delicious, raw, roasted, and fermented in kimchi. The daikon radish also serves as an outstanding cover crop. As the elongated root penetrates the layers of soil, it breaks up the tough soil. When frost arrives, the foliage dies off. Leave the plant to decompose, and the foliage is cut at soil level in the early spring and then can be turned under. Plant your crops normal right over it. It is probable that the turnip was domesticated independently in two places, Afghanistan and Eastern Mediterranean. It has been grown for several thousand years, and most often as a food for animals. That stigma may still be in some households. In Asia, the turnip is looked upon quite differently and is a very important crop in China, Korea, and Japan. Many varieties have been developed, including this Hockerite turnip, which I grow successively in my garden and that we grow an extra row. Hockerite turnips are an easy, cool season biennial. Harvested young, they can be eaten raw in salads and are delicious in a quick, sweet pickle. The young greens are tasty in salads or braised. If a few get too big, don't throw them out. Just add them to a stir fry diced and chop up the greens. Cooking brings back the flavor. Thinning is so important for all root crops. And above, here you see a square picture, is a perfect opportunity to harvest a larger turnip and give that little turnip space and the resources to grow bigger. Other popular turnip varieties are the purple top globe, that's ready in about 55 days, and the yellow amber globe, which is ready in about 60 days. Again, hints for planting: creating seed tape with your turnip seeds will eliminate the pesky little seeds when you're sowing them. All right, so here's horseradish. Why would I include horseradish? But horseradish, because horseradish is a persistent perennial. You can interpret that however you'd like. It isn't a good idea to put it in the middle of an annual bed. But if you love the spicy, pungent flavor, you want to include this root crop in your garden. Once established, it can be difficult to remove. However, it's not an invasive plant. I actually grow my horseradish plants in large 5-gallon pots that sit at the edge of my raised beds. It keeps them contained and gives me ease in harvesting. Horseradish is not grown from seed, but is propagated vegetatively from pieces of the root. Smaller rootlets that grow off the larger roots can be trimmed off, saved for replanting, while the larger root can be eaten. It is a tough plant that does not require meticulous care in planting. Plant and harvest your horseradish with the directions above. A nice thing is that the roots can be dug up on demand when a recipe calls for it. But it's going to have its best flavor if you harvest after it goes dormant. Any fragrance remaining in the ground will grow into a new plant, which can be good or bad, depending on whether if you want it in your garden. So choose wisely. The characteristic flavor only appears when the root is grated, which ruptures the cell walls. The insert is some of my precious home-grated horseradish used at holiday meals. In preparing horseradish, open your windows and turn on the exhaust fans to ventilate the room. I have always worn my safety goggles and a face mask when undertaking this task. The grating or damage of the horseradish root releases an enzyme to react with the glycoside to form a mustard oil. Buying fresh horseradish or freshly prepared horseradish can be pretty expensive. I enjoy growing this easy root crop in containers. Growing tuberous roots like the sweet potato, it is native to the Americas and was introduced into Europe very early in the history of Europe colonization, about the 1500s. But it didn't do well because of the chilly growing conditions and was then taken to India, China, and other tropical countries. It's been cultivated in Polynesia since 700 CE. And so this is puzzling to historians. Since the plant is grown from a slip, it could not have floated westward. And it is now thought that the Polynesians traveled to South America, picked up the sweet potatoes, and went back home with them. Sweet potatoes are not very particular about soil quality, but they do like lots of heat. They are grown from slips that grow into a vigorous plant that forms long 5-foot vines and produces attractive pink flowers. They need room to roam or trail out of containers. Some popular varieties are Beauregard. This is the most widely grown variety with reddish orange skin and deep orange flesh. Hawaiian Sunshine produces off-white skin and purple flesh. Northern Star has reddish purple skin with creamy white flesh. The directions above also explain how to grow your own slips. Potatoes originated in the mountains of Central and South America and have been cultivated for over 6,000 years. Potatoes are bushy, herbaceous perennials that are grown as annuals. The plant will grow 2 to 3 feet tall and about 2 feet wide. Potatoes are pretty easy to grow, but here is a hint for the novice. The most important cultural practice is burying the plant over and over again as it develops. Once the potato plant emerges from the dirt, when that plant pops up and it's about 3 to 4 inches high, gently spread a 3 or 4 inch layer of soil, mulch, or straw around it. Be very gentle with the stem, but cover it up completely. And when that plant gets 3 or 4 inches high again, repeat that covering process. This is repeated 3 to 6 times and well into June, possibly July. By covering up the plant, you are giving it nutrients and encourage the tubers to form. Plant potatoes in late March or early April. Above are the propagation and planting instructions. Plant varieties include early ones like Yukon Gold, Cal White, Purple Viking, mid-season, dark red Norland, Kennebec, red Pontiac, and then the late varieties are German Butterball, All Blue, and Russet. Here was something new that I found in a couple of different sources. While researching the potato varieties, the the different varieties were described as some were determinate and some were indeterminate. The indeterminate potatoes consists of the early potatoes and the mid-season varieties. This means they grow and mature in 90 to 100 days, and then you'll see the vegetation growing, dying off. These tubers are usually found 6 to 30 inches deep in the soil, so they don't go very deep. They have a specific growing time frame. Whereas indeterminate, which are sort of main crop potatoes that are commonly stored for winter use, the roots of this variety continue to dive deep into the soil, producing significant root crop of tubers. They can go down as deep as those roots go, sometimes 2, 4, or 6, or even maybe 5 feet deep. If you're familiar with growing determinate and indeterminate tomatoes, then maybe you can visualize that these indeterminate roots on the potato continue to branch out and keep growing down into the soil, perhaps like your indeterminate cherry tomato plant grows long branches and continues to grow up. The plant, it just keeps growing as long as its resources are met. So I hope that you can plan to add some root crops to your vegetable garden. Think about these 4 points. Think about stretching your gardening experience by planting new or unusual varieties of root crops. Integrate good cultural practices into your gardening to get the best out of your root crops. Learn to identify the vegetables in the plant families and develop a crop rotation plan and integrate companion planting. These resources will come to you and I want to thank you for joining me. The resources and a copy of this webinar will be sent to you in a few days. Now let's join Cheryl for our Q&A. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Priscilla.
Hi there.
Loved your presentation. You know what I love the most is the historical references. We've been vegetable gardening for a very long time from a variety of places. So we should know all the answers, right? We do have a few questions for you. So I'm glad that you got your coughing under control. That cold that little grandchildren are sharing has been shared to many grandparents. So one of the questions, or one of the things you said was, in the case of the example you used were carrots, making sure that those seeds remain moist while they're germinating from the 5 to 14 days it takes to germinate. We didn't really talk very much about irrigation and how to check for moisture in the soil, but what is your experience growing carrots? I know you said floating row cover is very helpful, probably stops evaporation. What other ideas have you for irrigation on carrots, making sure they get enough moisture?
Okay, that's a great question. And I did not talk about irrigation because that's another whole webinar.
It is.
When planting your those root crops, you want to plant them as close to the irrigation line as possible. That's a first good step. People kind of see their irrigation line and then they just automatically want to make a space. No, plant it right down as close as you can. So your trench or your seed tape. And then a good way to measure if your soil is moist enough is you really just want to stick your finger in the soil and you really want to go down at least 2 digits, not just your fingertip. Don't just tap the top, but go down deep. And when it is moist, you're going to feel that it's a little cooler and you're going to feel the moisture on it. Sometimes when I have my irrigation down and I don't feel like, oh, I don't know if that's wet enough, I get my watering can and I give it a light sprinkling. I don't do anything forceful because that'll push the seeds down too deep, and then your seeds are not going to germinate and come up through there. So plant your seeds close to an irrigation line and then supplement with extra watering with just like your watering can.
Excellent. And I'm sure monitoring frequently will make sure you have a successful carrot crop. While we're on the topic
Yeah,
of
I don't go 2 days without kind of checking. If I'm wanting to grow those crops, I'm checking very frequently.
you want them to get off to a good start, which brings me to seed tape. We did have a couple questions about seed tape. So if you do carrots on a seed tape and you have them spaced just as it says on the back of the seed packet, what do you do when you have several that didn't germinate? Did you just go around and
I just fill in. Yes,
go poking?
absolutely. And I can even use seed tape for filling in because it's much easier to rip off a little piece of that toilet tissue where the seed tape is situated and just plop it down and give it a good watering. And when I install seed tape, I make my trench, I water it with the watering can so that it's wet. Then I place the seed tape down. That water holds the seed tape and you don't have it flying away.
Flying all around. Somebody wanted to know if it discourages birds from feeding on your seeds. And I suppose in a way it would, because it's less easy than just plucking them off the ground where they're exposed. So I guess maybe that's a side benefit of seed tape.
It's a side benefit if you really have problems with birds coming in and grabbing the seeds, because yeah, the crows sit in the trees near me.
And watch you plant.
Floating row cover is a barrier that they're not able to do it. Or you can just do a small little hoop house. That's
Okay.
always a good idea.
We had one question about growing daikon radishes, which this person really likes to grow them, and she gets lots of foliage, lots of flowering, and puny little daikon radishes. What's she doing wrong? Does she have too much compost? That's what she's wondering.
Well, we're growing a root here. So maybe there's too much nitrogen in the soil, and that nitrogen is just accelerating that growth of the vegetation above, and not enough of the potassium and phosphorus in the soil. The other thing that she might want to look at is if the soil really is nice and loose. Is it nice and loamy? Because if a plant is struggling to send its taproot down, it's concentrating on that. And yeah, I think it might be a nitrogen thing. But because a taproot, like a radish or a carrot or a daikon radish, that is the plant storing energy and putting that energy into the root for its biennial process. So
Right.
So maybe some soil amending,
Maybe
or
soil
plant it in a
testing.
different spot.
There you go. That's a good suggestion. If it's too rich in nitrogen, that is a problem. It will send all the energy to flowering and fruiting, and it won't make the root go down, which is her goal. So maybe she can try that this year. Try a different place. Let me ask a question about this. A little bit about pests in your garden, and you talked about row cover keeping out the birds when you've just harvested, put seeds down for them to. They watch you put them down, and then they very lovely come down and snitch them. So row cover will stop that. Rabbits are a problem. Did you guys find at Row and X Row that tool will keep the rabbits out?
Yeah, you can use tool if you want more sunlight getting down on your crops, or you can just use remay, but the real key is, and maybe you saw it in that picture, is we use these document clips and we pull that down all the way to the surface, and then we clip that in really tight. And so when we say we batten it down, we're really pushing it down as low as possible. And then when you get to the next hoop, you're pulling that tight, clipping it in so that you
No,
have a
yeah,
nice barrier there.
yeah.
And we have not had a big problem with rabbit predation, and other gardeners in our area at Grow an Extra Row are having that problem.
That is a great tip. That is an easy tip. It's an easy solution to a thorny problem if your bunnies are finding your radish patch.
And with root crops, you don't have to worry about pollinators, so you can keep those buried as long as you want. You're not, wanting the beneficial pollinators to get in there and help you set fruit.
Exactly. Is rotation thwarted by volunteers from prior crops such as tomatoes? This lady says, wherever she plants a tomato, tomatoes come up. And so she said, what should she do? Because it seems like she does move things, but then she has these volunteers.
Well, it depends how much space I have. If I see a volunteer coming up, say near my lettuce, because that's where tomatoes were, I will just go in with my little trowel and I'm like, you can grow, but you can't grow here. And then I either put it in a little pot and then share it with a friend, or if I have room in my garden. But usually those volunteers are so small and insignificant, when you're seeing them pop up in April or May, they're not really going to develop. So just pluck them out, and then you're not going to give the pathogens a host plant.
Right. Don't set out the dinner plate for those pathogens. Trudy loves beets. They're her favorite, but they're never big. They come out, they're about a half to an inch. She says, what am I doing wrong?
Well, one problem might be that you've planted them too late. They are really a cool crop and can go in, the end of March, beginning of April. Trying to think of the soil temperature. I think it's like 45 degrees. I mean, they can go in really early and they want to grow quickly. So I'm wondering if Trudy is, getting her garden going in May or June, and then
Um,
they're not having those conditions. I think
those
they're
cool conditions that they typically enjoy. I
right.
do, if I'm remembering correctly, Trudy said she's tried both. She's tried planting them early and she's tried planting them late because she's frustrated. But I'm wondering if a part of the issue might be the soil is, you discussed the soil tilth so that the root can actually go down and grow. And I sent her the link for growing vegetable crops that you recommended. So hopefully that's helpful to her. But it's hard to know unless you can examine the gardening space. But
Yeah.
maybe that's
And
part of it.
also Trudy, make sure that you are really giving them space. They want like 5 inches to grow, and it's okay to plant them tighter, but you need to eat those young crops and pull them out thin and give them space, and to feed it moderately with phosphorus and potassium. Good
Sounds
luck.
great. That is a great answer to that question. And I think I have one more question. Oh, when you were talking about indeterminate and determinate potatoes,
Yeah.
one person wanted to know, so in both cases, whether they're determinate or indeterminate, they need to be in a hill. They still need a hill.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And your determinate potatoes are going to be more of the new thin-skinned potatoes that are familiar, that you might be familiar with. And then the determinate ones are the tougher ones. One key is, if you want to store your potatoes, do not wash them after you've harvested them. You just want to brush the soil off and let them dry and sort of cure.
Right. Cool and dry. And that you do have the tendency to want to wash them. I've seen that too. But this is one case when you can be a little bit careless and let the soil just remain on
Yeah.
them until they're dried.
Wait until you're preparing them to eat.
I think potatoes are one of the most fun crops to grow. They're just delightful and easy. And and because I never apparently ever got all the potatoes out of it, it's a little bit like the lady with the tomato problem. I always have potatoes every year, no matter what.
Yeah, again, be ruthless.
Yep. Priscilla, that was a wonderful session. You answered all the questions great. We have no more questions that need answering, and you can go rest your voice. and get over that nasty cold.
Yeah. When I started this project, I was thinking, how much can I say about radishes and beets? And it was a pleasant surprise to research this topic and bring it to everyone today. I hope that you learned something new.
I think everybody enjoyed it thoroughly.